Okay. Sorry. Good morning. Hi. If you don't know me, my name's Anya, and I've got the privilege of sharing with you this morning. It's really good to be back, isn't it, to be a gathered community together. And if you've joined us during this season where we've all been scattered, or maybe you've been away for a while and come back and joined us, it's a really good time to be part of the community at Central Vineyard, because we're still kind of figuring out what this thing called church is. Now, you may be surprised to hear that because we've been established for 15 years, I believe, at Central Vineyard. But actually, we're in a time of reimagining. And that's reimagining what it is to be a family of churches in multiple locations, what it is to be a church physically together, how that works again, and also what it is to even, be here as a single location rather than virtually in our own homes. And reimagining what has God got for our communities and for our town and the wider county and around us. What is it that God's doing here? So, just going to get a bit of audience participation here. Show of hands, who's lived in Northampton for forever or what feels like forever? Got a few of you here. So those that haven't got their hands, you can put your hands down now. Those of you who haven't got your hands raised have obviously come to Northampton for a certain reason. Perhaps it was family that brought you here, or work, or a really bad sense of direction and you just ended up here somehow. Maybe university and you've stuck around. But, some of us were born here, like me. But, if I say to you, what comes to mind if you think of Northampton? There'll be different things that spring to your mind. Maybe it's your school or your university or your home, your neighbourhood. Perhaps you are thinking of Abington Street with its half-empty shops, or a bankrupt local government trying to scramble out, working out what to do. Maybe it's your home or your family. Or maybe it's iconic things like Galoni's ice cream. The best ice cream in the world, isn't it, Pete? Yeah. Matter of debate in our house. But I'm Northampton born and bred. We did our family history at some point, and it goes back at least 400 years of my family with no imagination to move anywhere outside Northamptonshire. So I was going to break the mould. I went away to university in Brighton and was not coming back. I love my family, but I was not in love with Northampton. And I hear so many people say about Northampton of negative things. And I do agree that there's lots of systems and services that are broken in our town. But I also have a hope for this town, for the county and for the people that live here. And I was led back home, not quite kicking and screaming, but God definitely brought me back here with some incentive of having Pete back here. Some incentive. But God grew a passion in me for Northampton. And I started to realise that I wasn't just here by accident, or I didn't just have to be here because there wasn't a better option, but that God had got a plan for me to be here and a plan to use me. And when I read Isaiah, there's a few verses all kind of linked together in Isaiah, and my heart beats a little faster because I know that God has a plan for restoration and a hope for his people. It says in Isaiah 49, I will help you to restore the land, to apportion its desolate inheritances. In Isaiah 58, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins. You'll restore the age-old foundations. In Isaiah 61, they will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. So God is in the business of renewal and restoration and transformation. And here's the good news. He invites us to join him. Jeremiah 29:7 says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, hopefully those that have been led to Northampton or end up in Northampton might not feel that they're in exile. Some of you might. But God gives us this command to seek the prosperity of the place where we live. And at Central Vineyard, we have this phrase, you'll have seen on the website or in posters around the building, of a community following Jesus, joining God in the renewal of all things. So joining God in renewal starts with an invitation. He says, come. And if you want to hang this talk in a Bible verse, if you want to turn to Matthew 4, This is it's our starting point. In Matthew 4, we read how Jesus called Peter and Andrew. He says, "Come and follow me." And at once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two brothers, James and John. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. He invites us to join him. Immediately, the invitation is to come. Go on to read, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. And large crowds from all over followed him. You see, God is already in the business of moving and working and pursuing people, of healing and of restoring. He isn't waiting for us to get started. He's already moving in our neighborhoods, in our networks, in our towns, in our workplaces. And he is inviting us to come. Come and join me. So I guess the first question is, where is the Father asking us to join him? Where is he at work? Now, this is kind of a trick question because God, of course, isn't selective, and we know that he's at work everywhere. But so maybe if we split this into three questions. All good sermons have three points, right? Thank you, Moira, agreeing with me there. So first of all, where do we expect to see God working? And then we're going to go on to where do we see the evidence of God working? And where do we see the opportunities to join God? So let's start with expectation. Where do we expect to see God moving? Chances are we have a higher expectation of seeing God move in some places than others. And if we drew a nice line diagram or a graph, you might say coming to church on a Sunday might kind of hit that midpoint. We might have some expectation walking in today that we might hear some people come and share words, or that God might touch us as we're worshipping. We'd come in with some expectation. Maybe if we went to a Christian conference, we might go in with a lot of expectation. That might be right at the high point. And if we're going out to the supermarket, we might go with very little expectation. And I know that I mentally and spiritually prepare a lot more for a small group or leading a talk on a Sunday than I do going into Aldi. And I'm not suggesting that we should be on our knees and spending time in prayer every time we leave the house. I mean, that would create amazing transformation in Northampton and beyond, I'm sure, if we really took everything that seriously. But actually, what I'm saying is that when we are expectant, when we're on the lookout for where God is moving, we often see evidence of God moving and then opportunities to join him. Alan Scott, who was a leader over in Northern Ireland, tells a story in his book, Scattered Servants, about a guy called James in their community. Now, James had bought a dog and decided he was going to be quite intentional with how he walked his dog. He walked the same route every day and joined a community of dog walkers that he got to know who also walked the same places, same times. And he was expectant that God could use him in that situation. One day that he saw a man that he was regularly jogged who was walking. And so he asked him, "Oh, I see that you're walking rather than jogging today. Have you got some pain?" And the guy shared that, got a leg injury or something. And James offered to pray. And immediately the pain left his body. He was instantly healed. And over a short time, James led this guy to faith. And over time, James shared that he'd led 8 of these dog walkers to know Jesus. Can we imagine that happening in Holston Firs or Abington Park? Do we go into those situations expectant to see God move? You see, James knew his purpose in life was far bigger than any job, what he was employed to do, and the way that he undertook his everyday tasks. He knew that he was a carrier of God's kingdom. He walked the authority of Jesus into every situation. So when we're looking for where God is, if we're expectant to see God show up in the everyday situations, even on a dog walk, then that kingdom authority is released. And often, the kingdom authority that is on us is so limited by our expectations. But if we understand and accept the power of God and his invitation to us to join in the work that he's already doing. See, he was already pursuing those 8 dog walkers and plenty more. He was already interested in those people before James came along. And James just joined in that partnership. If we expect to see people give their lives over to Jesus or to be healed, even on a dog walk, then we start talking about the transformational power and experience of Jesus in our own lives. Whereas if we just expect that actually it may or may not rain, then all our conversation on that dog walk is about the weather. And it makes me realise I need to up my game if I'm walking my dog and in lots of other situations. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness in Matthew 6:33. This is all God calls us to do. You see, if we seek first his kingdom rather than letting our minds be consumed with so many anxious thoughts and all the things that we have to do each day, then he says he'll take care of that stuff. Seek first his kingdom. Look out. Get involved in his kingdom. What is it that he's asking us to do? And I've been inspired over time by several Christian speakers who have talked about where they would go out to a coffee shop and just ask for a word of wisdom for the barista, where they would take more time at the airport to be interrupted and to pray for healing of people going through. You know, they weren't setting up a healing on the streets in the airport. They were just expectant in those everyday situations that God could move. And when I've heard those inspirational talks, I've gone out and said, right, when I go to Starbucks next, I'm going to be looking for who I can pray for, who I can give a word of wisdom to. But within a short time, it fades, and I just look for the table at the back where it's going to be quiet and I won't be interrupted. You see, I don't have this all together. I'm not standing here to talk about this because I've got this right, but I want to get this, and I want to be part of a church that gets this. I want to be part of a church that carries God's kingdom and sees transformation in Northampton. Expectation comes first, but it's reinforced by evidence. And the reason we may be more expectant at a Christian conference than in the Isle of Aldi is because there are other stores as well. I'm not just endorsing one shop there. But because we see God move at a Christian conference. You know, we've seen inspiring speakers, people healed, people set free, transform lives, sharing stories that inspire us. Our faith increases as we see evidence of God at work, and we become more expectant to see it more. We go in with our eyes open, we look for God on the move. And something happens when we live in expectancy because God meets us. You know, I don't think it's that necessarily we release more of God. He is there already, he is working. But when we start stepping out in the supernatural, we have our eyes open to where God's at work. When we worship with power, we experience the Holy Spirit. When we look for miracles, we get to be involved and to partner in that. We see where God is evident. So if God's moving everywhere already, in our schools and in our workplaces and in our neighbourhoods, if he's already seeking out and pursuing those people who are around us, without us doing anything, without us creating great programs, without us knowing all the answers, just imagine how much more could happen if we were looking for it, how God could involve you if we were expectant and ready. If we looked and expected God to use us to heal the sick, and that sounds like, you know, a good phrase that we hear a lot, but that's actually just saying, do you know what, I can see that you've got a cough today, or you're really struggling with migraines, or, you know, that bad back's been troubling you for a while. Can I just pray? If we have that confidence that God will show up, because he's already interested in those people that we're a bit interested in, but he's so much more interested in. If we have that same excitement that we walk into DTI or New Wine or a leaders conference, if we carried that excitement for God to show up in our everyday lives, how much more would we see that? One place that we see expectation meet evidence is in the community here in Northampton that come into this building. And I'm not just talking about a Sunday, but during the week. So we reach out through Restore Northampton to bring life and love to communities around us through love, through compassion. So Restore Northampton's the compassion ministry of Central Vineyard, and I know that there's many of you in the room who have been involved or are currently involved in Restore. So from a Monday to Thursday, our doors are open again, hooray, for the communities to access a whole range of services and activities. And some are focused on meeting people right at that point of crisis, such as the food bank and Grow Baby, and then offering support around money or parenting, and then building skills such as our allotment. And then we've got community spaces where families can just come and be, and adults can come and receive support and love and a listening ear. We have Baby Nest and Sensory Nest and our Hub Cafe. And over the years, Restore has developed to respond to the needs, to watch where is God working, where is God opening doors, where can we get involved. We're quite a fluid charity or ministry because we can just actually turn on what we're doing to meet the needs of the community. And we're now quite recognised amongst the town, so local councillors or health professionals will come and refer. You know, we have thousands across the town that will refer into services. And often we're asked, why do our services so effectively meet people's needs so quickly, and even big problems that seem impossible get dealt with? And the only thing that really sets us aside from all the other agencies that do fantastic work in our communities is that we are the church in this community, that we can pray for miracles, that we can do God's work and we can see where, and we're partnering with him. People have walked in and said, it feels different in here. What is it about this building? It might be that we've had too many broccoli delivered to us and the building's a bit smelly or something. But, you know, there's a smell of God in here. It's also that. It says he uses us to spread the knowledge of Christ everywhere, like a sweet perfume that overrides the broccoli smell. Our lives are... Sorry, I've gone off tangent here. Our lives are a Christ-like fragrance rising up to God. God is at work and he is inviting us to join in him reaching out. And so I'm just sharing some stories from Restore as evidence of God working in our community when we say, yes, use us. How can we be involved in what you are doing, God, what you are passionate about loving and caring and showing mercy and grace? So, you know, our teams, and we've got volunteers, like I say, many from this room, will sit and listen and play and chat with families who walk in from all different cultures, religions, backgrounds, circumstances. And we get to join God in that work. And over the past 18 months, it's been a challenge because we haven't been able to just invite people in. And though, you know, if we're reaching out to those who are in crisis or isolated, it's really hard to build community when everybody's at home. So we had to ask again, God, how can you use us? What's the felt need of our town? Immediately in 2020, as things locked down in March, food was the immediate need for many. So Northampton Food Bank stepped into the forefront of Central Vineyard's compassion ministries, and it took over the whole room here. If you follow us on social media, which I'd really encourage you to do, to follow Restore on there, you'll see pictures of literally the whole room looking like a crazy supermarket. And it took the focus of the whole team, and we invited more of the church into this work. And most of our Restore team had increasing demands on their workload at that time, but also were having their children at home. And so Helen recruited more from the church to sort and to pack and to distribute hundreds of bags of food and clothes and essentials to individuals and families every week. Then the next emerging need was families that were isolated, with desperate and deep issues, and many services just closing their doors, trying to figure out how they would be able to reach them. And again, the church responded, looking for how we could join God in loving our communities through phone calls and doorstep deliveries of clothes and essentials, providing laptops and mobile phones, enabling parents to look for work or for kids to engage in home learning. So when we ask, where is God at work, and look for the evidence, we see it in stories like this. One family who we as a church, as a ministry responded to said, during lockdown, Restore gave my family a food parcel, then coats for my children, toys, and then later a birthday present for my son. Olivia, who's our support worker, introduced me to the Red Cross, and they gave me help to a hardship fund. They gave me a solicitor with my case. When you prayed, my racist neighbour moved on. I've been awarded a resettlement card which will allow me to work and provide for my family. Isn't that great news? Isn't that God at work already pursuing this family? And we just get to join in. The projects at Restore open doors for the church to love our community, and it's an honour to see God at work. In Alan Scott's book, Scattered Servants, he says, it is the privilege of the people of God to love their cities back to life. Isn't it just? Don't we just want to love our cities back to life? Don't we just want to love Northampton back to life? To hear people say, this is a great place to live and work. Our communities are thriving, and we get to join in that. This is seeking first the prosperity of our city. Since Grow Baby was established, one of the greatest joys has been watching God know what's needed before we do. Perhaps a cot or a pushchair will be offered before a family walks in, knowing that God knows that they need that exact thing. I remember once a princess dress being donated, and the next week a family coming in with a little girl who had never had the luxury of dressing up clothes, who was so excited that she could take that home. It wasn't an essential, but God just was saying, I know. Maybe a brand new toy purchased through the Christmas toy appeal, and the parent being able to choose that toy for their toddler, wrap it up and give it from themselves, knowing exactly what their child wanted, but they couldn't afford to buy it. Giving dignity to that family to give it from them. Each family will say, but how did you know? And of course, we don't know. It's all God. He loves and he pursues, and we just get to join in. We shouldn't be surprised, but we're repeatedly humbled by God showing up in these everyday situations. Before lockdown, when we would chat to people face to face, we might just silently pray for a word of wisdom or an insight or something to encourage that person. And it actually amazed us, it shouldn't have done, that God could still show up over the last 18 months with us doing this virtually. Through phone calls or texts or Zoom calls, masked meetings with families. One day, Olivia was on the phone to a lady and she felt prompted to ask if she could pray. This woman was then filled with the Holy Spirit. No laying on hands. Not the band coming to softly play worship music in the background. She didn't have that on the phone with her. No rousing talk from the pulpit. Just God doing his thing and us joining in. And you might be thinking, well, this is all very well. You get to do the kingdom work because you're paid to do this. And you're right, it's an absolute honour for the team who are part of this to have a church that value a compassion ministry so much to birth it into a charity, to love the community enough to open the doors every day and to value this work enough to pay a few people to lead these projects. It is an honour. But we know that joining God in the renewal of all things is far bigger than the work that happens in this building. It's far bigger than the work that's done by 8 or 9 staff on the Restore team. It is you guys joining in this stuff or joining in with where you're planted. God is at work at every part of our society. It's just that I've got a handful of stories from what's been happening here. So in your schools, in your workplaces, wherever you are, there will be stories just like this of God already at work. And if there isn't, God is begging you to join in with him because he wants to birth stories like this where you are. Wherever we are, the call is the same. Come and follow me, just like Jesus said to those first disciples. They weren't disciples at that point. They were complete random people. And he said, come and follow me. Come and join in. Come and do what I'm doing. And sometimes it's really hard to see God at work. And it might be that we're just too busy or too distracted, that we're not expectant. Or maybe if we're totally honest, like me, hiding at the back of Starbucks, we don't really want to be included. It's a bit inconvenient. Not today, God. Sometimes we just miss it. We're tuned into the wrong things or tuned out completely. And I know from personal experience and hearing from others over this last season, 18 months or so, that it's been a challenge to walk in step and to listen closely and to really connect with God. But the battle is really worth fighting to overcome apathy and distraction and the pressures of work and home. And it can feel fruitless and painful sometimes to be praying for renewal and restoration in situations where we see no evidence of breakthrough. But we have to remember that God's pursuit of people, his desire for renewal, is far bigger than ours. He does not sit still. So to see God moving, we have to sometimes wait, to listen, and to watch. We need communication. Prayer fuels mission. It's not a discipline that stands on its own. It's not that the introverts can stay at home and pray and the extroverts go out to do the stuff. Both are for both. Prayer and faith and works all go hand in hand. So we pray how Jesus taught us to pray. If we don't know how else to pray for a situation, we say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We join God in the work of restoration through intercession and waiting on God, waiting to be shown where to go, what's next, how to interact. We wait for breakthrough in areas where we can't go. In situations where we cannot speak, we speak to God. And prayer does change things. Over the past 2 years, we've prayed for situations that seem beyond hope. We would stand and wait and pray, and this happened on Zoom through our team while we were all at home, but just saying, God, we can't solve these issues. And God would show up, but not always in the way that we would choose, and not always in our timing. Sometimes it would be weeks or months of praying for the same situation. But we heard stories of peace where there was pain, and joy where there'd been despair, and hope where there'd been grief. We prayed for a pregnancy where there seemed to be serious concerns over the baby, and now that healthy 3-month-old joins us in some of our community groups. We prayed for a family who were in freezing cold conditions, who then got rehoused after weeks and weeks of us praying and the situation seeming to not get any better. Families desperately needing finances had shopping vouchers arrive in the post when there'd been a big hold-up. Those expecting grants receiving double what had been applied for. Protection over women and children escaping abuse, asylum seekers, families at risk from gangs. For emotional support and professional help for families experiencing abuse or trauma, or suffering with mental health issues or homelessness or debt. Healing for individuals who had injuries or illnesses, sight problems, cancer, migraine, COVID. As I look back over our threads of prayer, all these different things have been woven into our petition to God of just, you've got to do something, God. And God's already there, busy at work. And we can't say that every story's got a happy ending or been resolved or can be summed up in a nice little case study. But we are certain that as we joined God in the hope for transformation of these lives and these situations, we got to partner with him. We got to see things his way and become part of the story and to celebrate him at work. Our team supported a family that were waiting on their leave to remain, so they weren't able to get any support financially from this country and needed to have their status changed. Their experience of application for asylum was very poor, and they had really very little support. The mum would come weekly to our groups, and when lockdown happened, was at risk of being completely isolated. But somehow, a few of our team's paths crossed with this lady, and multiple team members were able to reach out and offer some kind of community or connection with her. Weekly, we prayed for her situation as a team. It was complex, and sometimes we felt like we saw breakthrough, and other times things just seemed to get more bleak. We were told that they would have to be moved on to another part of the UK, but we prayed that God would keep them here where we'd got community around them. Somehow that just bought us a bit more time to be able to get things set up, and meant that Olivia could make contact with the Vineyard church where they were going to be moved on to. When it was time for the family to move on, we had to trust that God would be part of that story as he'd started. They only stayed a short while in that new area and were quickly moved on to another part of the country. This time we couldn't pave their way. All we could do was pray. However, the lady contacted Olivia to say that she'd had support from a local church. A lady was visiting her and bringing her meals. God is pursuing them. God is pursuing the people around us. He knows and he loves, and we just get to be part of that story. But now our part in that story has ended. But the story that God's weaving is still being written. So how can we follow Jesus? When he says, come, how can we get involved? What can we do? Where are the opportunities? Ephesians 5:2 says, Paul says, follow God's example as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love, just as Christ has loved us and gave himself as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. It shouldn't be intimidating because we get to just join in. We are not responsible for the healings, the miracles, or anything else. And if those things don't happen when we get involved, that is not on us. That's God's business for him to take care of. He just says, come and join me. Come and have a go. Even Jesus, God in human form, says the Son can do nothing of his own accord, only what he sees his Father doing. Following Jesus isn't a passive action of just looking on from the sidelines, or it is walking alongside and getting involved. We need to have our eyes fixed on him and be ready to move. And my girls like to play this game with me of catching my shadow. They try to catch their own shadow and have quickly learnt that that's almost impossible. But it helps if we're walking somewhere and they're getting a bit tired, because I can pick up pace and weave and jump about, and they try and catch my shadow. They're following my every move and they try to stay close. Their eyes are fixed on me, but it's not actually on me, it's on the evidence of me on the ground, looking at where I'm moving, anticipating what's coming next. And it's good fun. You know, this is what following Jesus can look like. He isn't up to playing tricks like I am, but when our attention is on him and where he's moving on the ground, we get to see what's happening and join in. So where are the opportunities for us to join God in the renewal of Northampton and beyond? Corinthians 1:17 says, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned them, just as God has called them. So this is start where you are. You know, we don't have to go out to the far-flung corners of Africa on a mission trip. God is calling us to join him where we are. So what is in your hands? Hang on a second. I have all my sheets. Yes, there we go. Pete Hughes, in his book, All Things New, shares this fantastic story, which I'd encourage you to read because I won't do it justice, but basically about a project that he visited in Tearfund. They did a survey of what have you got in your area, what can you use for God? And people were saying they hadn't really got anything. One guy admitted to owning a bit of swampland, but it was a bit of an embarrassment because it was a breeding ground for mosquitoes. But actually, as the time went on in this project, they realised that they could dig a hole in the swampland and start to try and breed some fish. So this happened, and it turned out that the fish survived. And as the fish started to flourish, this guy in Uganda was able to sell the fish at market, and then that would pay for the children to attend school. A second pond was then built, and this time workers were paid out of the proceeds from the first pond. But it turned out that these fish were really flourishing. They were really breeding well. And the reason was that they were feeding on the mosquito larvae. And so malaria rates dipped, and it actually brought renewal to the whole community. This man thought he had nothing to offer. He had nothing in his hands. But he had what God needed. It's like a loaves and fish story. And so we might feel that we have nothing. You know, what can God do with me? I'm just at school. What can God do with me? I'm in a business where I cannot utter his name. What can God do with me? I don't go anywhere, I'm at home. But actually, God will use what's in your hands. He's eagerly desiring transformation and renewal in all of those situations, in those schools, in those businesses, in those neighbourhoods. Where you have been planted matters. Where you spend your time is significant. If you're at school, maybe you spend 30 hours a week there. At work, maybe 40, 50, more maybe, perhaps. Who you spend your time with day to day matter to God. Pete Hughes says, God has placed you as an instrument of restoration exactly where you are, to bring renewal and redemption to people and places. He invites us to follow his way. Where you live and work, therefore, matter. There is an opportunity to join God where you are. There's also an opportunity to join God where you long to be. Perhaps he's given you an idea or a passion, something you've not yet birthed. Perhaps it's a people group or an age group. Perhaps you've always wanted to get involved with the youth of the church or involved in a ministry that happens outside of the church. Maybe you've got a buzzing idea that you would love to see happen that isn't already here. The projects and things that I've described at Restore are just a small part of what we can imagine, but there could be so much more. Perhaps it's an industry or an environment where you'd love to see transformation. So what's holding you back? What do you need? What do you already have in your hands, like the guy with the swampland? Begin with prayer. Have an expectation for restoration and renewal, knowing that your longing isn't even a patch on God's heart for it. He was already pursuing before you were even aware, before you were even involved. Like Esther in the Bible, perhaps you were called for a time such as this. And there's an opportunity to join God where he's already moving. So the things that I've been telling you about, Restore, how the church is already reaching out to the community. Doing God's kingdom work doesn't rely on you to have all the ideas. Perhaps you can join in that something's already happening. So there's projects through the week that I've described, and I encourage you to look on the Restore website to find out more about those or the times that they happen. And we're also, we'd really love to see more of the church involved in volunteering in that, to be that sweet fragrance of Jesus. We have volunteers from the whole community involved, but to be able to have people who are ready to hear what God's saying and support and love our community would be amazing. There's practical help that you can get involved in with Restore. So on a Tuesday evening, one of the groups that we're launching in the next term is going to be a practical group to make up and sort grow baby parcels and donations, harvest parcels to go out to families through schools, and Christmas appeal. So if you'd like to get involved and are not available in the week time and the daytime, there's going to be an evening group on a Tuesday evening for Restore. We also need the church to be able to respond to those immediate needs, so the cot and the pushchair, and perhaps money to be able to buy those things that aren't offered immediately. So if you can follow our social media on Restore, if you can look up Restore Northampton on Facebook, you'll find us on there, and that's a way of seeing what we need. We post on our Grow Baby page if there's immediate needs for that project particularly. But also we need the support of prayer, to be actually praying for our communities. And then there's a new emerging need of Afghans that have been resettled in Northampton. And Olivia's representing, Olivia with many hats that I've mentioned today, sorry I didn't tell you how many times I'd say your name, is wearing the hat also for Welcome Churches. So that's a way of us reaching out through the churches, and that's in partnership with other churches in Northampton, to reach out to Afghans that have been resettled in Northampton and Northamptonshire, who have had to come over because of risk to themselves, and they will be settled here and maybe into the wider community, but at the moment they're in temporary accommodation and do have some immediate needs such as clothing and items for their families, but there will be ongoing needs, particularly around befriending and supporting and loving these people. So that will be not just fitting into sort of daytime activities, but also evenings or helping physically. So talk to Olivia if you'd like to get involved in that. If you'd like to get involved in Restore, come and talk to me or Hannah. And I haven't asked his permission, but Pete is really passionate about seeing people develop and start things. So if you've got an entrepreneurial idea, if you've got something that's buzzing, I just can't work out how to get this into action, come and have a chat with Pete, because that's what he's really passionate about. And there are others of you in the church who are passionate about so many things. So make yourself known. Maybe put something out on social media this afternoon. I would love to see this happen. Who would like to join me in this? We do not hold the monopoly on what happens in our community. You guys do. So just get involved in what you think God is calling you to do. Look for where is at work, what is birthed inside of you. So let's stand together to respond